All right, let's move on to the final game that we wanted to chat about, and this is the Klassiker. Here, I did it, Stefan. I called it what it is. It's a Klassiker. It's the original Klassiker. It's been the first Klassiker in German football history, and it still is, in my opinion, the Klassiker, and it always will be the Klassiker because these are the two clubs of the biggest history, dating back to the 1970s. Some might say a clash of cultures. I don't buy it. There's so much storylines about the left-leaning guys at Gladbach and the more conservative guys at Bayern, which is not true. I think both those players were pretty left-leaning at the time, so it's thrown that straight out of the window. This is so interesting because of the context of history in recent years, right? Gladbach always has made this a game. And Gladbach actually, on top of that, have been pretty good this year, right? This isn't like, oh, here's Gladbach who are struggling, and this is the one game a year that they show up, and they show up Bayern Munich, and they take 2 points of them, maybe all three, especially at home. No, this is actually a Gladbach team on the up that has, given a lot of good teams in the Bundesliga a game. And I think the way that they set up, the way they play football, they might be able to hurt this Bayern Munich side.
I think there's no doubt about it. You're absolutely right. They had a difficult start to the season, where they obviously, I would say they had a difficult start to the season. I'd say they had a difficult fixture list because in the first kind of 5 weeks they had to play Bayer Leverkusen, had to play Bochum away, which is never an easy tie for anyone, even though they won that game, and then Stuttgart and Frankfurt. And they lost to Leverkusen, Stuttgart, and Frankfurt in those games, and suddenly the alarm bells were coming out for Gerardo Siona, but to Gladbach's credit, they stuck with him. And after the 2-1 defeat in Matchday 6, it feels like they really turned a corner. And they've been outstanding since then. In fact, so much so that I was just checking on the Transfermarkt website, because you can check the form table. Since Matchday 7, only Bayern Munich and Bayer Leverkusen have picked up more points than Gladbach, who are sitting on 18 points. Leverkusen are sitting on 21 and Bayern Munich are sitting on 22. So you could make a very strong case that going into this game, Bayern are up against the third most informed team in the Bundesliga so far this season, or at least over the course of the last 3 or 4 months, if you will. In particular, Gladbach also have an outstanding home record. We saw them obviously. I mentioned that game against Leverkusen that kicked off the Bundesliga, where they came from behind, if I'm not mistaken, to pick up a point. No, they came from behind, went ahead, and then there was a Florian Wirtz kind of goal penalty in like a 95th minute in classic fashion to kind of rescue a point for Leverkusen. But Bayern, Gladbach haven't lost a game so far this season at home. And sorry, they've lost 2. Sorry, I was checking a different thing there. But yeah, they've got the 4th best home record in the league, 3rd best form from Matchday 7 onwards, and this team just feels like it's beginning to click. Whether it's Kleindienst or whether it's Rocco Reitz in the middle of the park, the whole team's just kind of feels like Gerardo Siona has kind of finally figured out how to get things working for them. And they deserve a huge amount of credit for that. And they'll go into this game, as you said, with that kind of historic wrinkle to the fixture. And it's a match where Gladbach do typically, cause an upset. So we'll have to see what happens. And as we now know, Manu, Bayern Munich are going into this game without one of their key players.
Yeah, Jamal Musiala is out. Plan is to have him back for the game against Hoffenheim in the English Woche, which is next week, right? We're going straight to this match day, to a midweek match day. So yeah, Jamal Musiala is out, and I do think that changes the equation a little bit, because he has been the creative guy. He's been the guy that got the coals out of the fire whenever it was getting tight for Bayern Munich in the first half of the season. So him not being there, I think we're going to see the value that he provides to the squad when he's not there. In a really important game, and this is a really important game. Gladbach are one of the few teams in the Bundesliga that have a winning record against Bayern Munich. 23 wins, 19 ties, and 14 defeats at home against Bayern. That's something, right? I have another interesting stat for you here, Stefan. The Bayern Munich have only lost once in the last 9 games to open a calendar year, and that was against Gladbach in 2022. So, this is a really difficult fixture for them, and not to have Jamal Musiala around in one of those games is big, because we've seen it against Dortmund, we've seen it against St. Pauli in that game where they needed 1 goal, right? We've seen it against Benfica. He does recently hop up more and more often to score those key goals when things are getting really tough. And he also has that ability to just drive play a lot more than he did in previous seasons. He's more physical, he's stronger. His ability now to not only see games develop, but also to run through defensive lines has significantly improved this year. And I think his heading is also a development of him being just more physical this year and stronger. I read somewhere that he's gained significant muscle mass ahead of the season, somewhere around 10 pounds. That is quite a bit, right? So him not being there, I think that changes the equation significantly. All of a sudden, Vinny Kompany will have to find a different way to be creative against a Gladbach side that will just try to be destructive, right? And make rooms narrow and try to keep Bayern outside of the box and probably try to hit them on the run, on the counter-attack. So, yeah, I think this is a big news story for Bayern Munich that they without Musiala.
Yeah, it's huge. And obviously he's in the middle of a contract negotiation, so that kind of underlines how important he is. You're right. It's going to be really interesting to see how Kompany deals with this. I think I saw in some of their kind of mid-season friendlies, so kind of friendly matches during this break, that Kompany was playing Thomas Muller's that kind of number 10 role. And it'll be interesting to see if he sticks with that. I would hazard to guess that they actually have a ready-made replacement there in Leroy Sane, who has been kind of coming back to form, or at least was towards the end of 2024. He's obviously a player who missed out at the start of the season through injury, through lack of fitness. And by the time he kind of got back up to speed, you took a look at that team and saw that Michael Olise was in his place. And he hasn't really been able to kind of get back into that team in a kind of fundamental way since then. He obviously has himself an expiring contract. He's fighting for his future at the club. And it'll be interesting to see if Kompany feels like he can trust him in that number 10 position, because, as Bayern Munich fans will know, last season under Thomas Tuchel, Sane really thrived almost as a second striker off Harry Kane for much of last season, more or less playing in that number 10 position. And one of the kind of big things that has kind of pushed Sane to the side this season is that Kompany quite rightly said, look, first things first, going forward, Jamal Musiala is the number 10. Because for the last kind of couple of seasons, we've seen Tuchel, Nagelsmann, Flick, etc., trying to accommodate other players by sometimes playing Musiala out as a kind of left-sided winger or left-sided inside forward. And it hasn't really allowed him to kind of have the space to thrive. And we've seen Musiala back to his best this season. I don't think it's a coincidence. That's because he has been given that number 10 position. It's his. He's not going to lose it. And going forward, that's going to be his position. And the rest of the squad has really had to kind of adapt around that. But because he's out of this game, it gives Sane an opportunity to step in, show what he did under Tuchel, show that he can link up with Harry Kane, show that he can be that match winner in the middle of the park. And by no means am I suggesting that he can suddenly kind of wrest that back off Musiala. I think that debate's been settled a long time ago. But for this game alone, he'd be the guy I'd be looking to for Bayern Munich. But Kompany's an interesting guy. He makes bold decisions. He's actually dropped Musiala for one of these games, obviously that Aston Villa match in the Champions League. So he's not above and beyond dropping big personalities or making changes to his team. But yeah, we'll have to see what happens going into this game, because I wouldn't go so much to say it's a must-win for Bayern Munich, but if they lose with Musiala out of the team, no one else really steps up, and I think that has been a concern for a lot of fans this season. The grumbles begin very quickly, and Bayern start 2025 with a stinker.
Well, especially if Leverkusen win, right, then it's only 1 point. But we're not quite there yet. I think what's really interesting is that Leon Goretzka played instead of Pavlovic in the midweek friendly against Red Bull Salzburg, and there's now some talk that maybe Goretzka starts in this match over Pavlovic. I'm not sure that's what I would do. because if you don't have Musiala, who else is going to hold the ball on to you for you, right? Pavlovic is sort of the creative guy in midfield that can compensate for some of this. So I would like to see Pavlovic over Goretzka in this, but Vinny Kompany is, as you said, he's a bold man. He makes decisions that not always make sense for us in the outside, but that do work out. There's also been some suggestion that Thomas Müller could start his games for in that number 10 role with Sane and Olise on either side. Müller has really shown the lack of pace. I think that would be a big mistake if Müller is indeed starting there. I don't think he's going to, especially in a game like that where the opponent is going to try to hit you with pace. I'm not sure that's going to work out. But these are projected lineups. They usually turn out very different when it actually drops on the match day. I wouldn't even be shocked if Musiala all of a sudden is fit in this match, in this lineup. I've seen crazier things. But, I think Müller would be a mistake, Stefan.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. And like I said, I think it makes perfect sense if Coleman's back, which I've got no reason to doubt that he will. I think it'll probably be a Coleman, Sane, Michael Olise kind of back three or midfield attacking three behind Harry Kane. And I think that'll work just fine. I think the other thing that's worth bearing in mind here is that Upamecano suspended for this game.
Yeah. Dier is supposed to start.
Exactly, yeah. Dier's meant to start. And, Bayern are coming up against a good Gladbach team, but also coming up against a good Gladbach team that have Tim Kleindienst in attack, who's in red hot form, got his call up to the German national team recently, and is a bona fide target man who will absolutely adore going toe-to-toe with Kim and Dier in the middle of that park. I think Upamecano would have probably gave him a run for his money in terms of physicality battle, but he might fancy his chances against Kim and Dier. So that'll be an interesting kind of thing to keep an eye on as well. Obviously, as I mentioned, Veth in the middle of the park. Roko Veth, the young midfielder for Gladbach, has been really going from strength to strength this season. It'll be interesting to see how he can do against, as you said, Kimmich and Goretzka. But yeah, it's an interesting battle across the pitch, but I think it's also a game in which Gladbach will fancy their chances to an extent. They go into it with relatively little expectations, but they're in really strong form. They look like the real deal this season. And I think Bayern will have to be at their best, which without Musiala will maybe mean every one of those players who's starting will have to do a little bit more because, as you said, for long stretches this season, Musiala has been compensating for large chunks of that team, even and including Harry Kane, who, we spoke about before, does tend to go quite quiet in these big games. So, I'm not sure I know, as you said, it's technically their Klassiker. I'm not sure if I'd really label it as a big game, if you will. But it's a game in which Bayern would be absolutely delighted if Harry Kane can quickly score a hat-trick in the first half and put it to bed.
Yeah, I think the longer this goes on, the more of a Klassiker it becomes. Bayern have to, I think, put Gladbach away very quickly. This is going to be great. I'm looking forward to all these matches. Let's wrap this up. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Bet Online. Lots of great content on the Substack. If you haven't subscribed yet, check that out. We'll be back with the main show on, I guess, Monday at the latest. Stefan, any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Actually, we just want to quickly say that we actually launched a paid membership scheme on our YouTube channel, which the only reason I'm bringing that up is because we actually post our bonus podcasts on there for people, and they're behind that paywall. So obviously, if you are a subscriber to the Substack, don't worry, we're not giving away anything for free. But it's just an option for people who maybe aren't into newsletters or not a big fan of reading articles, but they enjoy the show. They've always wondered how they could sign up just to the extra podcasts, which we do get people asking for that. That's an opportunity to do that. So if you head over to our YouTube channel, sign up to be a member. It's $2.99 a month, which is exactly half what our Substack is, because you're getting half the content, because you're not getting the newsletter. And of course, you're not newsletters rather, and you're not getting the weekend chat, which we have with our Substack subscribers. But if you're not interested in any of that stuff, you just want more podcasts, you can sign up there on the YouTube channel, and you'll be able to listen to our bonus shows alongside everything else we stick up there.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, until next week, auf Wiedersehen.